The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of AIHA. AIHA does not endorse any guest or the entity that they represent. On this episode of Healthier Workplaces, climate change and OEHS challenges with guests Sadie Daffer and Doug Fallon.
Start implementing change if they have a passion for it, or if they even just care a little bit. It's something that's going to affect us all long term, and so making proactive efforts every day, starting now, it's going to be beneficial in the long run.
When I was a student, somebody helped me. I think it's my responsibility now that I found some success in this profession to help others. In my opinion, you can't see yourself as successful if you're not helping other people. We as industrial hygienists, EHS professionals, need to give back to secure that students are well prepared and supported in their educational endeavors. Look at it as paying it forward. Somebody helped me get to where I am, so I'm helping others to achieve their dreams. We all have to make sacrifices in life, but this is a gift that we can take pride in giving back through the foundation. Opening doors. It's that basic. It's easy for us to open doors and usher future EHS professionals along the path that we traveled when we were students. Sit back and think about the start of your industrial hygiene journey. How many people helped you get to where you are now? How expensive was school back then and how much more expensive it is now? Now think about how your giving will go into investing into that next CIH or EHS professional. Lead by example. Some folks helped me get to where I am, so I'm just doing my part. And it feels good to know that I'm contributing to the future of our profession. The foundation makes it easy in so many ways to make a gift, and I've seen firsthand how my giving has been appreciated by students. So do your part. Give back.
So Doug and Sadie, thanks for joining us today on the Healthier Workplaces show. Talking about a subject that's near and dear to me, climate change, and how that might be affecting, or how it should be affecting, OEHS professionals, right? So that's really the crux of our topic today. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
So I guess get right into it. We're dealing with a substantial amount of issues relating to climate change is that, somewhat accelerating, and it's certainly a problem that's immediate and, very important that we deal with. How does that, how is that something that an occupational environmental health and safety person should be looking at and dealing with, and how should that be affecting them? And I'll pose that to both of you. So Doug, I'll let you go first since you're at the top of the picture.
Sure. Yeah, I think to me the biggest part of it for OEHS professionals, as far as what we can and should be doing to address the hazards of climate change, is I think first and foremost becoming aware of what those are. So that may require additional knowledge, or increasing your knowledge on those hazards and understanding how they are going to affect workers and your employees, to make sure that you have the knowledge, skill set, and resources to address those hazards. Because I think that's something that climate change is constantly, it's in the name, it's changing. So, for those of us who work at relatively, stagnant work sites, maybe manufacturing or, production, where generally you're dealing with the same types of hazards on a daily basis, I think that's one of the challenges of climate change, is that it's going to be introducing new hazards, or it's going to be making things that maybe are a lower priority now into a higher priority as they worsen. So I think that's really the key part is understanding what's coming and then making sure you're prepared for it.
I mean, this is certainly a moving target, so it makes it even, I guess in that regard, it's more complex, because while we do have somewhat of a picture of what to expect and some of the things that we may be facing, there's still some uncertainty, and certainly as far as the timeline, there's still a little bit of uncertainty. So Sadie, thoughts on that? Again, we're looking at the 10,000-foot overview here before we get into the deep part of the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like Doug answered the question really well. It's just modifying what you're currently doing in your workplace to look ahead and see what could be potentially impacting you in the future. And one of the things that we've discussed is a lot of these issues have already affected certain regions, and they are spreading to new areas. And so thankfully there's some resources out there for people, but making sure they have access to that information, they know where to go and get the best knowledge experts advice and can make those adaptations as they come up or before they come up, which would be even better.
In the pre-show, we spoke about the three specific target areas that environmental, occupational health, and safety should be dealing with as far as climate change. First being chemical, second being biological, and third being physical. So Sadie, I'll let you just tell us a little bit more about the chemical aspects involved with climate change.
Yeah, so there are several. The first one I think most people think of is wildfire smoke and how that affects their workplaces. I worked for the Corps of Engineers a few years ago, back when I think there's still an issue right now, but we were dealing with some of the wildfires affecting our dams and the smoke. Just the hazard of employees working outdoors, and then what to do about the ventilation impacting the buildings in that area that were affected. I have a list over here if you don't mind, so I'm just kind of reading off of it. Additional chemical issues, it's more hazardous material releases. So with the increase in flooding that we're seeing happening globally, there's more rainfall, there's more impact to the wastewater system. And so that is could potentially affect and spread different chemicals throughout the water system as they come into contact with agricultural industries, chemical industries, and things of that nature. Indoor air quality issues. So there's going to be a lot of course, new green chemicals introduced that will need to be researched and see what their long-term impact is. As we try to create substitutes for some of the chemicals that we're already using in our homes, in our workplaces, and in general industry. So they could potentially be harmful. We don't know because, of course, they're going to be new and we'll have to have more research for those. So those are probably the top three chemical hazards that we think are going to be big and overall affect climate change.
And certainly there's the biological hazards. I think we just came off experiencing probably the one of our lifetime, right? The pandemic, which at least has by many been attributed in part, at least, to some of the climate change aspects, creating this opportunity for, this virus to jump, from the animal to the human kingdom, and however that actually happened, whether it was a laboratory or whatever drove it, still has a lot to do with it. So, Doug, some of these, let's talk about the vectors and some of the other stuff with the biological aspects.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. So you brought up a great example of COVID. Potentially being from a human wild animal interaction that maybe wouldn't have occurred without some climate change pressures. I think we're going to continue to see that as, especially as populations are affected by climate change and they have to either move or adapt their way of, living and working to deal with those new pressures. I think challenges are always going to come out of that. And that may be new infectious disease like we saw with COVID. You've also got a lot of vector-borne illnesses that are a concern. It does seem like insects like it warm, and so as temperatures change and the average temperature increases in many places, it creates more hospitable climate for multiple vectors. Comes to mind ticks and mosquitoes are two pretty main ones. I think there's always the joke that the most deadly animal in the world is a mosquito, and so as the climate changes, they can spread their range further. And generally, if it's the same type of mosquito, it's going to carry the same, diseases. And then another one I think of is waterborne illness. As Sadie said, as we have more severe weather and especially flooding events, those often impact drinking water supplies. So there's always an opportunity there for, waterborne and even foodborne illness from those events.
Yeah, and we're certainly, there's going to be no shortage of these things. I mean, you just look at the last several years, it seems everything's compounding a bit, and things seem to be accelerating. And I mean, at least based on what I'm seeing, it seems like this. I don't see it getting better in the near future. I don't know if there is a path for us to actually really stop what we've started, but it's going to be challenging. And I think, certainly the SARS-CoV-2, pandemic, that's not, I don't believe that's going to be the last. I mean, thoughts on that? I think it's unfortunately maybe what's more to come.
I mean, my thought is, and I'll offer an optimistic thought, is because I think you're right. I think, most of the public health authorities would say we're going to be seeing these more often, but, most organizations have a hopefully really well developed, really well exercised plan somewhere in their, database right now. And so what I would say is we just had really good practice at it for 3 years, and let's not lose all those lessons learned. Get that documented, get it figured out, and keep it fresh for the next time it's needed.
But see, that's a good point you're making there, because human nature, at least what I've seen in our lifetime, is that we have a tendency to have very short memories, and our attention span seems to be very ADHD, for lack of a better way to describe it. In general, that I'm not saying that for professionals necessarily. I'm saying in general, the general public. And so how does the the health and safety community drive this point forward? That we need to maintain preparedness. This is not a once-off event, and this is something that we really need to learn from and be better prepared for. I mean, how do we approach that? And I'll put that out to both of you.
Yeah, I can go. For me, I think we saw like a really good emergence of safety and occupational health professionals getting to shine in their profession with all of the issues coming up, because we do have a level of expertise, and that's our job to share it and make sure that it's people are informed, not just in our workplaces, but in the world. So I think we got to showcase, especially from like a public health sector, of what we actually do and who we actually are. Even though it was, a very dire situation, it still, it was possible to work through those issues because there are people that are trained in those topics. So it's kind of a weird way of getting some good PR and hopefully some more professionals interested in public health overall.
I mean, certainly, I think professionals in general, in the occupational environmental health and safety, I think did a stellar job. I think many would criticize that some of the governmental agencies, at least in the United States and maybe worldwide too. I mean, there's a lot of critiques on how WHO handled this. Maybe didn't do so well, and as far as engaging with the general public and getting timely information, credible timely information out in a that sort of fashion. And I mean, do either of you see any ways that maybe we could be better at that going forward, overall?
I mean, I think I probably sound like a, broken record, but I think risk communication is always an incredible challenge. I think there were probably a lot of lessons learned during the pandemic that will hopefully be, learned and passed on. But, the times where I saw the biggest loss of public trust were when we gave absolutes, I'll take the vaccines, for example, when the vaccines were first implemented, I think maybe not 100%, but it was general, discussion that they prevented transmission. And that later turned out to not be true. And I think largely it was not true because of the way, the virus changed, not necessarily any false information on any government's part. But I think was a big lesson learned, was that even if you're doing your utmost and being honest and upfront as much as you can with the information you have at the time, if it later turns out to be wrong, it's going to be hard to win back that trust. So, it's a very tough balance, because you want to be as transparent and open as you can, but you also need to be sensitive to the fact that if it's wrong, if we get it wrong, we're going to have a lot of ground to make up. So I think as much as you can communicate your uncertainty when you are communicating the things you believe to be true, I think that's a big lesson moving forward.
I mean, that's certainly the nature of a virus anyway, though. Certainly they do evolve. They evolve rapidly. And I guess the general public is a tough group to keep engaged and try to I guess disseminate evolving information in such a way they understand it. Everybody seems to, again, talking about the general population tends to look at sound bites. We tend to listen to things in very small snippets without really truly understanding a topic. Most people don't spend the time to delve into it. So yeah, that's a challenge. You have anything else on that, Sadie, on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like you said, it's very difficult when these scientists are learning in real time, as in the same span that the general public's learning about something in real time. It's hard to convey everything and just be clear when not everything is unknown, right? But I do think there was some really good utilization of social media, and we have so many online platforms now, and just like even Twitter was used, right? All of these social media sites to disseminate information, and we do have access to get information quickly. And I think that's a benefit. It can also be a detriment, but I feel like it was utilized more positively when information was being disseminated.
One of the things I saw is that it seemed like, as far as Twitter, specifically to Twitter, it seemed like academia and research seemed to really jump on Twitter and utilize it quite well. Oddly enough, the field practitioners, seem to be oddly absent, as well as the cognizant authorities too. They, outside of specific researchers and academics in this. And again, it seemed like the narrative was, I'm not gonna say one-sided, but it was challenging. And again, it's still snippets and sound bites, so I think that's a difficult point. Now, on the third point we highlighted here was some of the physical aspects of climate change. So I'll let you both take a shot at that and discuss some of those points. Doug, I'll throw it to you first.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that the obvious one that comes to mind is heat stress as the global temperature warms. But I think it's also important to consider that the global average temperature warming is not really what's driving that. It's the local climate, because 1.5 degrees Celsius is not going to put someone into heat stress, but it's the local heat waves, the increase in the hot days and heat events over the summer times usually that I think are really driving that concern. And one thing that I think is interesting with that is we've started to see a patchwork of state regulations come about due to heat stress. Largely I think because there is not a national standard to control heat stress, especially among outdoor workers. And so a lot of states have started to take it upon themselves to enact regulation. And so I think that's something that as OEHS practitioners, we really need to be aware of is which states have the rules, what the standards are within each state, and, how that affects us, especially for, national organizations. And then another one is severe weather, like Sadie mentioned earlier, flooding, hurricanes, heat waves. We can expect to see more severe events that are farther from the average. And, so that's something we need to continue adapting to and planning for.
And what's interesting too is you touched on the point that it's the local environmental situations happen, the outdoor physical things. Because you have floods. Some of these severe storms tend to be somewhat localized, regionalized around the planet. So it's not like we just have a catastrophic event that goes around the entire planet suddenly. Again, I would assume that some locales, some areas are going to be more regularly hit with these big events than others. I mean, unfortunately, most of the population lives near a major body of water.
Mhm.
So, obviously, sea rise is a major, major concern, and what's happening with that. Any other points on that, Sadie, that you can think of that would?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to heat stress, we also have, of course, cold stress. So more regions are experiencing severe cold weather. And so they're maybe getting storms they're not used to. They're not sure how to manage sudden cold if they have a lot of outdoor workers. So that's another issue. And then increase in UV exposure for outdoor workers due to the thinning ozone layer. So battling with that. And
We'll be back after this.
Here's our consultant, Sarah. She's always looking for ways to grow her network and increase her business. But advertising is expensive. There are lots of competitors, and sometimes she has trouble finding the right audience. Luckily for Sarah, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, AIHA, offers the perfect low-cost solution, the AIHA Consultants Listing. This listing is the perfect resource for consumers and businesses, and especially for those in need of highly specialized and qualified industrial hygienists. Every year, AIHA sends the Consultants Listing to thousands of decision makers nationwide in a variety of industries, including legal, real estate, trade associations, academics, hospitals, and all levels of government, including most federal agencies. It's also readily available online through their website. Sarah had no idea the Consultants Listing was such a valuable low-cost resource. Now she knows getting into the directory makes perfect sense to better her business. It didn't take long before Sarah found her network expanding, and she was even pulling ahead of her competitors. The AIHA Consultants Listing, your link to building a larger network.
Pose this to both of you. What can OEHS professionals and what can they and what should they be doing to plan for and address the hazards that we're going to be facing with climate change? And as these obviously, as you both mentioned, will be evolving hazards. It's not just one set of parameters that stay the same, going forward. This is a constantly evolving crisis. How do we deal with that?
Sadie, do you want to go?
Yeah, I think educating yourself as an OEHS professional is probably the first step of just going through. One of the things I've been working on with the AIHA is the Climate Change Adaptation Task Force. And so just highlighting different areas that climate change will impact workers overall. And so if you have knowledge of what could come in the future, you could be better prepared to start saying, okay, where are the resources where I can find this information? How do I protect my workers in the future? So finding out what potentially can come. And then, Doug, maybe if you want to talk about modeling.
Yeah, I think that's one great thing that we're seeing as climate change becomes more of a concern. There's a lot more research and resources being put into trying to figure out what's coming. So one resource that I think is really great, which is a government resource, is heat.gov. They have a lot of really interesting, weather prediction tools on there that I think can be really useful for predicting, in 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, what is this area going to look like from a heat stress perspective, and start understanding, what I can do now, whether that's purchasing resources, whether that's getting additional training, whether that's, maybe even changing the way that we do work to adapt to those, those challenges. As we all know, planning and budgeting something out over a decade is a lot cheaper and easier than it is to budget it out for next year. So I think taking those little incremental proactive steps now is going to save us a lot of, time and money down the road. So I also just want to say, I think following the kind of typical IH model of, anticipate, recognize, evaluate, control is the way to go. Start figuring out what the challenges are going to be for your region, and then learning how to recognize and evaluate this.
I mean, thermal stress issues in particular seem like they could be the most severe on agricultural workers, right? The gig workers, and these are people that are not typically employed by Fortune 500 companies with big health and safety programs. You know,
Hmm.
these are people working day to day, or week to week, or month to month, season to season, and probably are not the ones that are that are covered by really thorough environmental health and safety programs. So how do we address that? In previous shows, this topic's come up before. Any thoughts on how as a community we can do better with that?
I think finding partnerships between, you know, industrial hygienists and safety professionals and community organizations. Like personally, I think that's something that we do okay at, but we have a lot of expertise in this world, but I think it doesn't often leave the gates of, you know, the employee employer relationship or, the work site. So I think finding ways to get involved in the local community, which I think a lot of us do through our local IH chapters. But finding community centers that might cater to those populations that work in those fields, and finding ways to conduct education, because even making someone aware of the hazard, I think is the first step to empowering them to protect themselves, assuming they have the agency.
I mean, as far as the planning and budgeting, is it both of your opinion that at least at the sea level that we're at least recognizing this issue, and more willing to actually allocate budgetary resources to deal with this?
Yeah, I think we see change happening. I mean, policies being made at every level, starting at the White House, and then there's been a large push for the Army to have like a focus on climate change. There are corporations that are putting out a lot of information of what they're going to do to change and what their like climate goals are. So it's looking positive, I would say. Overall, change is happening.
Yeah, I think something important there too is to make sure or to try to be involved in those conversations, because I think we see a lot of organizations talking about how they're working to get maybe carbon neutral or prevent climate change, or at least minimize it, but I feel like you have to dig a lot deeper to find what they're actually doing to mitigate the impact of their own operations and their own employees. So I think getting involved in those conversations and making sure that's incorporated as a part of that strategic plan is really important.
Well, I mean, certainly organizations like AIHA are, getting involved in that. But are you suggesting that professionals should be dealing with it on the more of their local level with their own companies and their own communities? Is that?
They should definitely be included in those planning meetings and those long-term strategy meetings for sure.
So both of you are very passionate about this topic of climate change, as am I. I think it's an area that we really have to step up and start making very substantive change on how we're behaving on this planet. So some closing thoughts. I'll toss it to both of you. Doug, I'll go first with you. Final point here.
Yeah, I think a final point is kind of pointing people in a direction to get started. Something that's important to me with my work and my career is emergency management and emergency response, and I think that comes into play a lot with climate change, especially when you start looking at emergency action plans. So I would say a good place to get started to understanding how these hazards are going to affect you and what hazards are probably going to affect your area is look into your county, or if you're in a large metro area, the city emergency management department or emergency planning commission. Most of these organizations put together some type of risk assessment or risk management document where they've already kind of done this work. They've looked at what the primary hazards and challenges are in the area, and so I think that's a great place to start to understand where you may need to start growing that literacy.
Excellent. Sadie, I'm going to toss it to you.
Sure. Yeah, I just hope people are empowered. They don't get down and don't want to take action when it comes to climate change, because there are so many solutions out there, and there are, like Doug said, so many resources already that people can reference and they can find, and they can start implementing change if they have a passion for it, or if they even just care a little bit. It's something that's going to affect us all long term, and so making proactive efforts every day, starting now, it's going to be beneficial in the long run.
Excellent. Well, Sadie, Doug, thank you so very much for joining us on this episode of Healthier Workplaces. Super important topic, one that obviously is ever evolving and ever challenging, but I really appreciate your efforts on this and keep up the good work. So that's our show for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new show. Until next time, I'm Bob Krell. Thanks again for watching, and stay healthy.